everybody. In this video, we are going to be relocating our layout from the old spot in the basement where it was. As you can see here, the layout is completely gone, and we're going to be moving it into the back room of the basement. And you can see a little plywood lying on the ground there. Now, the reason that we're moving it into this back room here, believe it or not, it's partially because of a cat. Our cat seems to have made a home on our layout down here in the basement. And so if we move our layout into the back room here, then we can, shut this door here and we can kind of keep the cat out and off the layout. And he's a good cat. We love our cat, but yeah, not good for the layout. So anyway, we took the treadmill and some workout stuff out of that back room and we brought it in here. So this will be kind of the new workout spot. Now, as we go into this back room here, this back room is 24 by 24, and you'll notice it doesn't have any posts. So this is really a great spot to put a layout. And the reason we didn't put a layout back here in the first place was simply because it was a little cluttered. It still looks a little bit cluttered, but we did do a bit of a decluttering here, opened up some space in the middle. And as you can see, we have some plywood on the floor here. Where we're going to, there's a little culprit now, where we're going to make some tables and redo our layout here. So our first step is to create new tables for our layout. And what we're going to do here is we're going to take two 4x8 sheets of plywood end to end and just make a long layout. Now this will fit diagonally in our spot. And when we get these tables together, if it turns out that it's just taking up too much space and we have to shorten it up, we'll be able to cut, one or the other table down to the appropriate length. But our first step here is to start assembling our tables. One thing I wanted to mention here about the plywood on the floor is that by laying the plywood on the floor, it gives us a good idea of what the footprint of the table will eventually be. So that's why our plywood is lying on the floor. But what we're going to do here is pop up a sheet of plywood on sawhorses and start doing our reinforcement and attaching legs and so forth. So let's get busy with that. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to fasten 2x3 lumber 8-foot lengths under the edges of the plywood. And you can see the 2x3 is clamped underneath the plywood. And so we're going to screw those from the top, and we're also going to countersink those holes so that the screw heads don't, aren't on the surface of the layout, and then, kind of causing problems later on with bumps and things like that. So we're going to put our screws about every 10 inches. Now, one thing you might be wondering is, why don't you just put the 2x3s on the ground and lay the plywood over it, and you'd have a nice solid surface there? Part of it is because of knees. It's just much easier to work at, at a standing height than it is to be on your knees doing this stuff. So that's why we have the 2x3s clamped underneath the plywood. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to drill pilot holes first. Then we're going to countersink those pilot holes, and then we're going to drive in our screws. So he's going to go in and drill those pilot holes, and he's just going to work his way right down. We've got them all marked out. They're about 10 inches apart, if I haven't mentioned it already. And those pilot holes will just make it easier for the screws to be driven into the wood. So we just laid out little pencil marks where they should be, and they should be kind of in the center of the 2x3, the width of the 2x3. So he's doing a pretty good job at that. And we used we could have used a 2x4. I think we used a 2x4s on our last project. But the reason we use 2x3s here is we're kind of getting conscious of weight of the table. We want the table to be a little bit lighter. I don't think we save much weight by using 2x3s versus 2x4s, but yeah. So he's going to continue down the line, and then we'll get to countersinking. Okay, the next step is to countersink, and as you can see, he's got a countersinking bit on there, and the countersinking basically just creates kind of a cone for the head of the screw to sit in, and that lets it sit under the surface, kind of lower than the surface of the plywood. Okay, so the next thing to do is to fasten our screws through the plywood and into the 2x3 lumber sitting underneath. So we're just using screws we have on hand. We didn't really buy a lot of special things for this. So we're using 1 5/8 inch drywall screws. And those drywall screws really have good holding power. Even though this is probably not the ideal use for them. We used them on our last layout and they held just fine. So he's just going to work right down the line here. And you can see that screw sitting right in the countersink there, so there'll be no chance that we'll get little screw pop-throughs when we lay down the grass mat. All right, with the clamps removed, we just gave it a little test shake just to make sure everything is all nice and solid, and it is. So now we're gonna go put the 2x3 on the other side. All right, so we got our second side all clamped up and ready to go here. So he's gonna drill his pilot holes, then we'll countersink, and then we'll fasten it with screws. Okay, so as you can see here, we've got the 2 side rails attached for both tables actually. You can see the other one leaning over there. And we flipped the table on the sawhorse over, so we're really looking at the underside of the table here. So the next step is kind of off camera, we ripped 4 pieces of 3/4 inch plywood. The deck plywood is also 3/4 inch. And we cut them to 8-inch widths, and we're going to fasten them to the bottom of the table. They're just about where you see them. And that is going to stiffen up the plywood kind of widthwise, but it's also going to serve as a base by which we're going to attach our legs. So as you can see, they're a little bit too long, so we're going to cut them to length so they kind of fit down in there on top of the plywood. So we're going to cut those and attach them, and then we'll move on to the legs. Okay, as you can see, we have our little plywood strips cut to width and cut to length. And so we're gonna have like 2 layers of 3/4 inch plywood. So that's gonna be 1.5 inches of thickness there. And so I think that'll keep the plywood, stabilized along its width at both ends. And then as you can see, we also added the leg plates where the legs will fasten onto. And you can kind of see the idea of where we're going here, is that we'll be able to have a nice anchor point for screwing in those legs. So what we're gonna do is fasten the plywood strips to the plywood underneath. We'll fasten that together on both ends, and then we'll move on to fastening the legs. Okay, so we're gonna fasten the plywood strips to the underside of the table using 1 1/4 inch panhead screws. I love the panhead screws. We use them for everything, various lengths and all that. But here we're gonna use 1.25 inches because the thickness of the 2 pieces of plywood is going to be 1.5 inches, and we don't want the screw to poke through into the tabletop. So the 1.25 inches will go through the first piece of plywood. We'll get a good bite on the tabletop underneath it, and it'll hold it nice and it won't poke through. So he's going to drill some pilot holes, and then he's going to drive in those panhead screws. Okay, so now that we have our reinforcing materials on our plywood, we have our 2x3 rails, we have our reinforcing plywood pieces here. On one end of each table, we're going to put a small piece of wood like so. And we're gonna set it back just a little bit. And we're gonna do this by eye from the edge of the plywood here. So you can see this just about maybe 1/8 of an inch or so here. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna glue this down and clamp it. And then when we turn the table over, then we'll drive some screws from the top. But it'll be too hard to work from the bottom here, so we'll wait till we flip it. And the reason for this is that these are gonna act, there's gonna be one at the end of each table, and these are gonna kind of act as a cleat so that we can clamp the two tables together to keep them, to keep them end to end without drifting apart. So that's what that'll be used for. So what we're gonna do here is we're going to take our wood glue, we'll put in a good amount there because we'll be using this on the other table too, so we won't be wasting any. And we're just going to give it a little spread here. Doesn't take much. Wood glue, once you glue a piece of wood using wood glue, the wood will break before you break that glue bond. And really, since we're going to drive screws down from the top, this is really just kind of holding it. We're not really gluing a lot in this project here because we do like to be able to take things apart and be able to repurpose wood. But this is a little bit of an exception. If we wanted to reclaim this piece of plywood, we would just cut the whole thing right across and just cut the glued piece right off. We wouldn't have an 8-foot piece of plywood, but at the end of that. All right. So the end is kind of glued. Let's get it to right about where we want it, and then we'll adjust it. We'll just press that down. And again, we do want a little bit of a gap here because we want the two butt ends of the plywood to be able to make contact without these making contact. We don't want this interfering with the contact that the end of the plywood makes. So this glue won't take long to set. I'm just gonna throw a couple clamps on it, and then we'll let that set. And again, we're going to do the same thing to the other table. Okay. Placement doesn't have to be exactly perfect, but we get about 1/8 of an inch right across. All right, the next thing is we're going to start it on the legs. All right, so let's talk about the legs that we're going to put on the table. So these are legs that we bought off of Amazon. The brand name is QLLY Adjustable Square Leg. I'll put a link in the description below. But these are adjustable because we wanted to make sure that we could kind of customize the height of the layout table. And these are adjustable from 24 inches to 40 inches, so they got quite a range. So here's how they kind of work. They slide this way. And then when you get them to the height that you want, it comes with all the hardware you need. And you basically just put a couple of holding screws in here. These two holes will make contact with these holes underneath. That'll hold them to height. And then what you do here is there's a plate that goes on the top. And this plate is nice. It has 8 holes that you can fasten it to the bottom of the work. But it's got a hole in the center, so when you're all set, you put that plate in there, and then the idea is you have a large, very sturdy screw here that'll screw into the top and hold the plate to the top of the leg. I'm not doing a great job here doing that, but you probably get the idea. So nice legs, 24 to 40 inches in height, adjustable. The legs are basically 3 pieces. The inner sleeve here, the outer sleeve, the plate, and those are the 3 main pieces. Then you've got all the hardware you need, and then the leg also has leveling things here too, so that you can make sure that when you get the legs down, they're level. So I think these are going to work out quite nicely. The one thing that we will be swapping out here is that the plate comes with these kind of smallish screws here. Here's all the hardware that comes with it for all 4 legs. And so these screws here, which would go right up here into the plate, 8 of those, probably would be fine in most circumstances, but we're dealing with a fair amount of weight here. So what we're going to do is we are going to exchange those smaller screws for these larger 1¼ inch screws. So, sorry, 1½ inch screws. So these are going to go through the plate here. These will be much sturdier. We'll do 8 of those, and what we'll do is we'll put those right through the plywood down here. Remember, this is kind of double thickness plywood. These are 1½ inch, which 3/4 plus 3/4 width for those 2 pieces of plywood is 1½ inch, and we do worry about the point going through the other side. But with the extra height here of the plate, we can use 1½ inch screw and know that we're not going to come through on the tabletop side. So we're going to do that. And then the other thing we're going to do here is, we've already done one, is that we're going to position our plate here. And what we've done is gone 2 inches from each edge and then 2 inches from each edge, just to make it look neat. We'll put the plate in there, like so, right in that square, so it's positioned correctly. And then we'll go through and we'll mark the 8 holes here. Remove the plate, we'll do our pre-drilling, and then we'll fasten the leg to the bottom of the table. Now, we can't fasten the plate separately to the table because there's a screw here. Remember, there's a bolt that will attach to the bottom of the leg, and that bolt is kind of free floating. It would be nice if we could go ahead and screw the plate down separately and then turn the leg on, but there's nothing really holding that screw stationary there, and we wouldn't be able to get a bite on it. So we'll drill the holes, attach the plate to the leg, and then attach the whole shebang to the bottom of the table. So first up, we're going to mark the other 3 legs on the table, and then we'll mark the holes, then we'll pre-drill, and then we'll be able to attach the legs. All right, so we're going to set our leg height to be about 31 inches. We're also going to put these legs on casters so we can roll the tables around if we want to. So we want to make sure that the leg plus the caster plus the thickness of the plywood table sets us at about the right height for our layout. And I think that'll be close. And if it's not, we can always just adjust these later on, move them down or up or whatever. But we have our height set here. We have our holes lined up. So we're just going to throw these very sturdy. These legs are sturdy. These legs, it's a good gauge steel. I don't think these are going to have any problem holding our layout up. Get my screwdriver ratchet right here. And these don't have to be super tight because we're not worried about them falling out. All the stress is going to be compression style, so these don't really have to be super tight. But if you don't want them shaking around. All right, the next thing we're going to do here is we're going to take our plate, if I can get my fingers under there, and we're going to go ahead and fasten that to the leg here. So I'll see if I can do that without getting too far in the way of the camera here. We'll get it started. Now there's a little indentation here, like a little bubble on that leg, and it makes that plate sit nice and square. It's all kind of shaped so that it all falls together. And this is a 1/2 inch bolt. So we're going to go ahead and tighten that up. And I'm just going to move it here to a more comfortable angle so I can get it nice and tight here, because this leg here, this bolt is going to be hidden under the plate when it's fastened to the leg, so you got to get this tight. I don't like to over tighten things, so I think that's probably good right there. Worst comes to worst, we can always take it out. Now I'm going to match up my plate holes with the holes that were pre-drilled. and they match up pretty good. And what I'm going to do is make sure that these adjustment screws here on the leg are facing out, so that if we have to make adjustments later, we can, you know, hold the table up with some kind of, you know, with something, and then we can, you know, adjust the height if we have to adjust them after the fact. And now we'll take my 1.5 inch screws, and we'll start driving. Start here on the front so you can see what we're doing. This is nothing special here, we're just driving screws. And what we'll do here is we'll do the 4 corners here just to make sure it's stable as we continue. Remember, there'll be 8 screws holding this in. Just with the 4, that's pretty sturdy. I'm almost tempted to stop there, but we're going to do all the holes that are available to us. We'll go ahead and fasten. And I'm going to feel under the table here just to make sure that there's no screw points popping through there, and there aren't, which is good. And we stripped one, which is something I wasn't not expecting, but we'll just continue around here. I think that's just because of the weird angle I was at, but we can pull that out later with a screw extractor. I don't think we're going to be in any danger of the legs not being supported here at all. All right, so except for that screw there, not bad. Those are very, very sturdy. So we're going to continue around, do the other 3 legs, and then we'll join you on the other side. All right, so we got 4 legs on our table here, and we even fixed the one that we stripped out there initially. I just took a pair of pliers and was able to back it out and then replace it with another screw, so that's good. Okay, so when we had the table flipped on its back, we had glued this piece of wood underneath, if you remember, just a few minutes ago. And so we said that when we flipped the table upright, we were going to go ahead and fasten it with screws from the top. So that's what we're going to do right now. So I don't know if you can see, but I have a line right here. And this line represents the middle of the width of that piece of wood under there. So when we put screws in here, it should be right down in the center of this piece of wood, and you know, help the glue hold that piece of wood in place. So I'm going to go to the end here, and right on that line, I'm going to drill. Maybe here. We're not going to be too careful about where we do this, as this whole thing is going to be covered by grass mat. So we'll just, like I said, we'll do 5 screws. Okay, with the holes drilled, we're now going to go ahead and countersink. Because anything on the top of the table, we want countersunk so that screws don't pop up through the grass mat. So there we are. We have our little cleat strip fastened not only with glue, but with 5 screws just to kind of ensure that it stays. Okay, with the legs on the second table, it's time to flip the table off of the sawhorses. So one thing that you don't want to do is put the table on the ground on its side and then use the legs as a pivot point. These legs, the way they're fastened, are not designed to take kind of lateral forces. You definitely want to flip the table up in the air and put those legs flat down on the ground. So what we're going to do is we're going to tip it off the sawhorses. We're going to put it on its side, but not on the legs, just on the wood side, the wood edge there. And then we'll lift it up and flip it and get it on its legs. So we'll just do what we did yesterday, if you remember. What's that? Right up. All right, now one additional thing that we added to the legs is these red 3-wheel casters. And what these will allow the table to do is to basically just roll around, because that's kind of what we want to be able to do with this project here, is create these tables that we can just roll around and move out of the way if we need to at will. And these are pretty good casters. We've used them before. We basically use them on everything heavy in the workshop to be able to move like the table saw around. Our YouTube table where we film is on a old workmate, and we have casters under that so we can roll it out of the way and so forth. So these casters you can just get on Amazon. They're not that expensive, maybe $15, $20 or something for a set of 4. But you just want to make sure that you get the, the same brand and the same type. So get 2 sets of the same. If you're doing 2 tables like we did, 8 legs, then you definitely want to get 2 sets of the same type, because these tables are, hopefully when it's all said and done, these tables will be all the same height. So that's why you want to use the same materials, the same legs, and the same casters, because the height may differ between different brands. So hopefully you'll notice here that the height was actually pretty good. So these 2 tables are basically at exactly the same height. Now we're going to do one more kind of woodworking technique in order to make sure that when we put these tables together, they line up correctly and they line up at the same height. All right, so for the last carpentry act here, we're gonna take our biscuit cutter or plate cutter here, or slot cutter, and what we're gonna do is in the edges of each of the 2 facing pieces of plywood, we're gonna cut slots, and then we're gonna glue what we call a biscuit, which are these things right here. You might have seen these on some woodworking shows. Those we're going to glue in only one side of the table, and then we'll just let them hang out on the other side, but we'll cut slots in both sides of the tables, and then when we draw them together, those biscuits will kind of help things line up. So yeah, let's give that a shot and see where that takes us. Okay, so what we did here was, you can see these little lines here. I hope you can see them, but they're periodically throughout here. This line is drawn straight across to the opposite piece of plywood, so these lines line up on both edges of both pieces of plywood. Hope I said that right. Now your biscuit cutter has this little red line here on it, and what you do is just line that red line right up on your pencil mark there, and then pull the trigger and then push in. Okay, so now we're going to cut the same slots on the opposite piece of plywood, and we're just going to cut at the same marks here that we drew right across both pieces of plywood to make sure they line up. And yeah, those slots will line up nice. Okay, so the next and final step of the woodworking portion of our tables is to take these biscuits that we have here for these slots, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to glue one side into one set of slots. The other set of slots we won't glue in because we still want to be able to separate the tables. We just want to have the kind of biscuits here to be able to line up the tables. And this will kind of keep them at the same height. By the way, this is the same technique that's used for furniture building. If you're making tables out of planks, then one technique is to use a biscuit cutter and line those panels up that way. So we'll just put a little glue on here and push them in as far as they'll go. Again, just glue on one side. And there's the last one. So we'll take a pass through, wipe the excess off, but here, that's all we're going to be doing with these biscuits, is just gluing one side. And then when we put the tables together, we'll line up those slots, and then we'll clamp the tables kind of closed by putting a clamp between this piece of wood on both sides of the table. We'll show you that from underneath the table to show you how that all comes together. But as far as the woodworking portion goes, that's about it. And now it's on to applying the grass mats. Okay, now with the carpentry done, we're ready to apply our grass mats. Now what we're gonna do here is we don't wanna glue the whole grass mat to the plywood because we may want to repurpose this plywood later. So what we're going to do is fasten one end of the grass mat to one end of the plywood, just at the end. So we're gonna do a strip of this contact cement across, and then we're going to fasten one end of the grass mat. We'll unroll the rest of the grass mat across the plywood, and then what we'll do is we'll cleat it on the other side. We've used that technique in past layouts where we drape the grass mat over the end of the table, and then we fasten it with a strip of 1/4-inch plywood, luan, I guess would be the correct term for it, right against the end. And that will hold the grass mat pretty taut. We think. That's our experience in the past. So first thing we're going to do is we are going to unroll our grass mat. And this is a 4x8 grass mat, by the way. This will cover the whole piece of plywood with a little bit extra that we may need to trim off. And then we'll repeat the process on the other piece of plywood. Okay, so as you can see here, we've got a grass mat kind of fit onto the tabletop here. And then we have this side here that we've got it kind of set so that it just kind of overlaps a little bit over the edge here. Now, these grass mats have a little bit of overhang on a 4x8 sheet of plywood, so you get a little bit of room to play with. But then we took the end of this and folded it back because we're going to put a strip of contact cement on the underside right at the end. And then we're going to put a strip of contact cement on this side of the plywood. And then when it's set a bit, we'll remove those cans and we'll fold we'll kind of roll the grass mat flat onto the edge there, and then that'll hold it. Now the reason that we have it kind of test fit here is you want to make sure that when you fold this, the rest of the grass mat is going to fit correctly. You don't want to make a mistake and have that grass mat skewed, and then you've got plywood exposed on one side or another because it's not straight. So you want to make sure it's nice and straight so that when you go ahead and roll this and make contact, the rest of the grass mat is, covering your entire piece of plywood. That's super important. All right, so with our contact cement kind of set and tacky on both surfaces, we'll take our little cans off here. And then what we're going to do is kind of roll it onto the surface, like so. We want to make sure there are no bubbles or ridges or anything like that. So the next thing we're going to do here is a PVC pipe, or length of PVC pipe, makes a nice little rolling pin type of effect there to make sure that there are no bubbles and things like that. And then the last thing we're going to do to make sure is that we're going to make sure it's nice and flat with a straight edge here. So we're going to put a straight edge right on the edge of the mat where all the contact cement is holding everything down, and then we're going to put some clamps on there. And that'll help ensure that it's all nice and flat, because that's really, I hate to keep harping on it, but that is very important to make sure that it's all flat. Because again, any ripple or any bubble will just carry down, and you'll see little lumps in the middle of the grass mat. So we're going to let this set, and then we're going to fasten the opposite ends. Okay, so we contact cemented one end of the grass mat to the end of the table, and we've clamped it with a straight edge just to make sure that it's flat, there are no ripples in it, and it's nice and straight. So what we're going to do now is we let that sit overnight. Anything with like gluing or anything that needs to dry or harden and we're not in a rush, we'll usually let that sit overnight, and so that's what we did in this case here. So we're ready to take these clamps off and remove those straight edges. And of course, everything we're doing to two tables here. So we'll take that clamp off, but we'll concentrate on one table for the video, and then just know that we're doing everything on both tables. So the next thing we're going to do is take the grass mat. We're going to we're not going to stretch it, but we're going to pull it taut at the other end, and then we're going to cleat it to the opposite edge of the table. Okay, the mic's a little bit further away here, so hopefully you can hear me. So basically, we've turn the tables around. So this is the loose end. That down there, that end down there is the end that we fastened with the contact cement. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull this taut like so, and then we're going to use these cleats we've used in the past right on the end here, and we're going to fasten them in with drywall screws just to keep them tight, and that will keep the grass mat pulled taut over the table. So one of the things that we can do to prevent any kind of rippling here when we go to pull the grass mat taut on the other end is, a while back when we were going to contact cement our grass mats to the table, we created this little rolling pin type of thing out of PVC. So this is just a PVC pipe. This one happens to be a 2-inch piece of pipe. You could go larger and heavier if you wanted to, but it's long enough where it overlaps the edges of the plywood, because these caps would actually, keep the rolling pin off the surface because of the added material here. But if you make it a little bit longer, you can have it sit over both ends, and now the rolling pin is kind of sitting like a giant rolling pin, is sitting on the edge here. And then what we can do is kind of roll this down like so, and we can kind of work the ripples out of the grass mat here, and just make sure that it's there. This is a not permanent roll. This is just kind of a demonstration here, but that would work pretty good, and it should get most of the little ripples out of the grass mat. Now, this is not going to be a ripple-free operation. When we're done with this, we will see little waves, just because it's not fastened down with contact cement. That's just a choice on our part. We can live with that. The layout will kind of flatten things out even further, but we definitely want to get things as flat as possible before we, kind of fasten the grass mat on the other side. So we're going to go ahead and roll this out just like we showed you, and then we're going to pull the end taut, and then we're going to screw in our cleats. Okay, so for this operation here, we're going to be using drywall screws in our little cleat here. And we're not going to pre-drill because these drywall screws will kind of self-tap, and we want as good a grab as we can on the wood. We don't want to compromise it with pilot holes. And we're going to leave our little, or our big rolling pin here, just on the end here as a weight. And I'm going to hold the grass mat taut, and he's going to start from the center and work out, because working out will kind of squeeze any kind of imperfections out from the side. And like I said, there'll be imperfections at the end of this, but it's imperfections that we can live with. And he's also going to make sure that the cleat is kind of below the edge of the table. So we're going to go ahead and do that. I'll hold it taut from the middle and he'll start. All right, I don't know if you got a great view of us screwing in that cleat. It's not a huge deal. It's pretty basic. We were just holding the grass mat taut and then just screwing this cleat into the end of the table here, and that'll hold it in place nice and uniformly. We got most of the ripples out of the grass mat. You can see it looks pretty smooth there. So that worked out pretty good. Now, one other thing you're going to notice here is that there's some overlap here. Normally, if you wanted to be super neat about it, you could trim that. We typically don't trim it because having the grass mat kind of overhangs a little bit. We're not going to have any weight on that or anything like that. But it does kind of increase the width of the appearance of your layout a little bit. So if you're super neat, yeah, sure, go ahead and give that a trim right to the edge of the table here. But to us, it's not that necessary. So anyway, so this table here is complete. So everything looks good. It's a nice, flat, sturdy surface to put your layout on. So what we're going to do is we're going to finish up on the other table, and then we're going to put the two tables together and show you how that works. All right, with the tables done, we have them oriented to where we want them. So we're going to join them right there in the middle. Before we join them, we don't want it to look like two tables are just butted against each other and have a big seam in the middle. So what we're going to do here is on one side of our table, we're going to trim off, this is one case where we're going to trim. We're going to trim off the excess grass mat here so it lies flush with the front of the table. But we're going to leave this one overhanging so that when we bring the tables together, we're going to cover up the joint between the tables. And there'll still be a little bit of a grass mat seam, you know, kind of overlapping here, but that's better, I think, than having like the gap that you might see kind of between two tables pushed together. So we're going to go ahead and trim this, and then we're going to push the tables together, finalize what this thing is going to look like. You notice he's cutting along a straight edge. We want that trimming to be nice and straight. Oops, we got a little bit of extra here to cut off on the end. All right, so there you go. We got a nice clean edge on that grass mat there. All right, I'm gonna go a little handheld camera here, so forgive the shaky cam if we get this, but notice on this side, we've got the trimming done here, so that grass mat is trimmed right to the edge of the plywood on this end, and then you'll notice here our biscuit slots that we cut before, and then on the opposite table, we left this flap here, and then here's the biscuits right here, if you remember those that we put in a couple steps ago. And then also, if you remember, we put cleats at the end of each table here. So there's one on each side. Sorry, let me make sure I'm pointing on camera here. So we're going to give you a shot from underneath, but we're going to put the tables together, and we're going to match up those biscuits, and those will match the edges of the table. And yeah, we should be able to put this table together. And then we're going to use these cleats here to clamp the tables together so that they don't separate. All right, so here is a view from underneath, and you can see what we did was we pushed the tables together. We lined up the biscuit holes, and we were able to get a nice connection on the table. And then we used those cleats with clamps. You can see those spring-loaded clamps there to hold the tables together. So it's nice and temporary. You can simply remove those cleats and pull the tables apart when you want to. So we think that's going to work out pretty good. We could also use C-clamps to draw those tables together if I felt like the spring clamps had too much tension on them, but they really don't. They're just enough to hold the tables together, and I think we're good to go. And from the top angle here, you can see that the seam doesn't look too bad. It doesn't look like two tables pushed together, and that's what the overlap of the grass mats does. It just gives us basically this seam to deal with right here. You know, you can kind of see the tables pushed together there. But I think that once we get the layout on there, a lot of that will be hidden. And I think there are techniques we can use to hide that as well. Like we can glue down some loose grass over that seam that matches the color here to hide that seam a little bit more. It's raised in that corner a little bit. You can see there's a little raised end there. We'll deal with that. That's a minor inconvenience. All right, guys, so there you have it. We have completed our 16 feet of layout table here. This is what we would call the blank canvas. So we have some nice, sturdy tables with adequate space with some very basic landscaping on top in the form of grass mats. And so we can basically do anything we want to from here layout-wise. So if we lay down some easy track and some village and trees and things like that, and then we get tired of it, well, we can strip it all down to the grass and do it again any way we want to. So, there's a lot of tables out there, a lot of videos out there of true experts at creating layouts, and they have very elaborate table setups. They wrap around walls, and they're multi-level and the whole thing, and they have compartments and drawers and things like that. This isn't that. This is if you're a beginner or just getting in the hobby, or you really need to use the space in your basement or the space you have available very carefully, then something like this might be for you, where we have these kind of modular tables we can pull apart and push over into a corner if you need the space for something else. Now, the other thing that I did want to mention before we end is the legs. Now, initially, in order to really make this modular and be able to move it out of the way, we wanted folding legs. And so we were looking at banquet table style legs like you see on banquet table. Like, as a matter of fact, over in the corner, that white table there, you can see those legs. That's an example of banquet table legs, and you can buy those on Amazon. But what we thought when we kind of sized them up was that they were a little bit too narrow for our purposes, and I thought they might make the table a little bit tippy once it got some weight on it. And so I kind of felt like we needed a wider stance, and that's why we went with the individual legs that had the adjustable height. So these legs can't fold, but if you really needed to take your layout down for an extended period of time, you could really just unscrew the legs and just remove them, and then just reattach them when you're ready to set your layout again. So anyway, I think that's going to do it for this video. We just wanted to get you started with your tables, your blank canvas on which you can do your layout. And in our next video, we're going to start laying down some easy track and start designing a layout. And maybe we can start running some trains again. It's been a while, so we want to kind of get back into that. And in that next video, I think we will. So we'll see you in the next one.